Okay, so just to review a little bit what we learned yesterday. Yesterday we learned to halacha in our Mishnah that says if someone brings a get and he's a shlich halacha, he loses the get, and then a little while later he comes back and finds it. If he finds it immediately, and we'll see what immediately means, then he can assume the get that he lost is the get that he found. Otherwise, it's going to be possible unless he recognizes the get or it's together with something that he knows is his. The Gemara had a stira from two places. Rabbah had a stira from a Mishnah in Bava Metzia that says that if you find a get and everyone's moided that it belongs to the husband, he can use it as a kosher get. And we had Reb Zera who asked the same kasha from a brisa. The Gemara answered, Rabbah answered, Reb Zera answered that the only time we're concerned that the get that was found is not the same get as the get that was lost is if it's shiyaris mitzuyos. If it's a high traffic area. If it's not a high traffic area, we don't have to worry about it. And Rabbah said, in addition to that, even if it's a high traffic area, if we don't know for a fact that there's somebody else out there with the same name and same coordinates, we're not going to be choshed that there's someone with that exact situation. So therefore, you need to have two strikes against you in order that the get shouldn't be good. A, it has to be a high traffic area. B, we have to know for sure that there's another such person. However, in Reb Zera, there was actually a question if you need both strikes or only one strike. There are two lashonos, and in one lashon, if it's shiyaris mitzuyos, if it's a high traffic area, even if you don't know for a fact that there is such a person with that name, nevertheless, the get will still be possible. So that was the first teretz that we had in between the two brises, or the Mishnah and the other Mishnah, or the Mishnah and the brisa, that have a steer as to whether or not you can assume the get that was found is the same get as the get that was lost. We had two other pshatim, and that is normally you would always be concerned, but the reason why, in the case of the Mishnah in Bava Metzia or the brisa in Bava Metzia, we do give back the get, and we're not afraid that it's a different get, is because the Eidim tell us that we only signed on one get for Yosef and Shimon. Therefore, we don't have to be worried. Well, we need to understand that Eidim come and say, we signed this get for this guy, they point to him, we signed the get for this guy, and we didn't sign any other get, we don't need a brisa to tell me that that's good. It's obviously good. There's no place to make a mistake. So Toshos offers us a couple of places where there is a little bit of unclarity. That's why we need a chiddush at a Mishnah or brisa to say that they're believed. One option is they didn't actually see the get. In other words, they're saying we signed the get for this Yosef and Shimon. However, we're not standing by the get. The get might be in a bezin somewhere where they were mekayim the chesima, but the actual person who signed it is not there. So he knows he signed a get, but he doesn't know that he signed that get that's in bezin over there. He's not seeing it. So that's why it's a little bit of a chiddush that we could still rely on him. The other one was if they said, yeah, we signed this get, we're here in bezin, we signed this get, and we signed it for Yosef and Shimon, but I can't identify him by face. I know I signed for a Yosef and Shimon somewhere, but I can't identify that it's this specific person. So because of those two areas where it's not crystal clear, that's why it's a chiddush that they're believed. The third pshat was Rabashi. So the reason why you can give him the get back and you assume this is the get that he lost is because he has a siman muvak. He has a siman muvak because he knows specifically there's a little hole in the klaf right beside a very specific letter. That's a siman muvak, and everybody holds you reliant to the muvak, even if you hold to regular simonim are not deraisa. Then we had the cute story of Abba Babachana, where he lost the get. He was a shliach, and he told the bezin, "You give it to me regardless. Either give it to me because I have tviyasa and I recognize it, and you could trust me because I'm a tzuvim marabonim, or give it to me because I have a siman muvak, because I have a siman sheina muvak." And he gave the siman, and they gave it to him, but they didn't tell him why. So he wasn't sure if he should be flattered or not. Did they give it to him or did they give it to him because they accepted the siman? Then we wanted to know, the Mishnah says, if you find it right away, then you don't have to be worried it was a different get. So the question is, how long of a lapse is a problem? So there's a variation in the opinion. Some of them are time-based, some of them are fact-based. Rav Nosson says, the time, it's time based. The amount of time it takes for a shiur to come and stop for lunch and then leave. That's the time based. Shimon Elazar said it's not time based. You actually need someone verifying factually that no one came by. You actually need somebody standing there to make sure no one came by at all. The Yishurim says you don't need someone to verify that no one came by, but you have to verify that no one came by and lingered there. And Rebbe said the amount of time it takes to write a get, and Rabbi Yitzchak said the amount of time it takes to write it, to read it, and Acharim said to write and to read. Okay, gewaltig. We also learned that if there's simonim on it, like we had from Rabashi, there's simonim on it, then even if it was missing for a long time, we could rely on the fact that this is the same get. Okay, then we learned about, can you assume that someone remains alive? A shliach leilacha was sent with a get. Who was he sent by? By a man who was either old or very ill. So the question is, it might take him a year till he gets to the destination and he delivers the get. How do we know a year later that the fellow back home who sent the shliach is still alive? It's not like they had communication in those days. So how do we know that he's even still alive? Zok the Mishnah, you could rely on the fact that he's still alive. And the Mishnah actually offered 3 examples of cases where we trust that the man is still alive. Well, first was the case of the get. The same was a man, a kohen, travels, and his wife is only allowed to eat truma because she's married to him. She can continue to eat truma, and she can assume that he's alive. And the third example was of someone who sends a korban chatos, Medina Sayam, to Eretz Yisrael to be makab as a korban. This is during the Beis HaMikdash. How do we know that the fellow who sent it is still alive? So you can assume that somebody is still alive. So Rabbah limited the scope of what. Yeah, but I think it's referring to the same type of case. Yeah. So Rabbah limits the scope of this case. And he said that's only if he's under 80. If he's over 80, we need to be concerned. So the Gemara asked the Kasha, because Abaye showed us a brisa that says that even if someone's 100 years old, you could rely on him. So the Gemara at first thought it was the Tiyufta, but then the Gemara said no. Even the Ivlik Polik. Once a guy hits 90, from 80 to 90, yeah, we're afraid he's going to die. Once he hits 90, we can assume the Malach HaMavis forgot about him already. So therefore, given the Ivlik Polik, he's that old already, he's going to be good to go. You know, it's clearly, Rashi explains, clearly he's a stronger type of person, and his genetic pool is different than what most people have. I remember when my Shver's younger sister turned 90, he said, "Oh, Bradley Varananzik." Okay, I remember my Shver once asked me about Rav Nosson Wachtfagel. Where did the Yinga Manchik? He was in L.A. and he had a long white beard. He was an old man, and my Shver asked me, "Where the Yinga Man?" Okay, so the Gemara. Rami Lay, sorry. Then he was like 98. Rami Lay Abai, when he was lived, he was 99. Rami Lay Abai Le Rabba. Abai asked Rabba Kash. Tanan we learned. I maybe get v'hinichai zakein oichayla. If someone brings a get, so he's a shliach leilacha. V'hinichai, when he left the sender, the husband, the fellow was old or sick. Noisin lo b'cheska shukain. Right, that's our Mishnah. Urmini break Abai to his Rebbe Rabba. Urmini. What if someone is traveling away and he gives his wife a get and he says, this get should be chal 1 minute before I die? Asura lechal b'truma miyad. If this man is a kohen and his wife is only eating truma on account of being married to him, at every moment she needs to be worried that he's going to die, and therefore she may not eat truma anymore. So the problem is, if you can assume he's alive, why can't she eat truma? Amar lei. So Rabbi answered, truma a Gittin karamis? Come on, don't ask me a kasha from truma to Gittin. Truma efsher. She doesn't have to eat truma. She can eat chulin. But get lo efsher. What are you supposed to do? You're going to make women into agunas. They won't be able to get Gittin. So really, we can assume he's alive. But if we could be makmir and it's not such a great difficulty, so she'll eat chulin instead of truma. Big deal. However, that doesn't help us out completely because v'rami truma. We're going to have now a stira in truma minei ubei. Tanan we learned Bas Yisrael hanasui l'kohen. A Bas Yisrael was married to a kohen, and therefore she's only eating truma on account of the fact that she's married. And her husband went traveling overseas on business. The halach is oichelas b'truma. She's allowed to eat truma the entire time. becheskas shehu kayim, and she can assume he's alive. The problem is we're mini because we had a moment ago the brisa. If he gives her a get and he tells her to be chal a minute before his death, asur lechal b'truma miyad, she has to stop eating truma right away. So the question is, if you can assume he's alive, well then, even if he gave her a get with shachas kodim misasai, she can assume he's alive. And if she cannot assume he's alive, so if he didn't give her the get in a regular case, how could she continue to eat truma when he travels overseas? How do we know that he's alive? So b'monisha, do you assume he's alive or not? Amar about the Bered of Yitzchak, shiny hasam. There's a very big difference. We're not worried. We're not worried that he's dead. She can eat truma, but the get is going to be chal even before his death, a minute before his death. So that we're not worried that he's dead, but we're worried that he's a minute before his death. How do you like that term? You don't like it, okay? Maskal or Papa, come on. What type of term is that? How do you know that he's going to end up dying first, and then she'll actually become a Gereshus? Dilma ihi ma'isa bereisha. Maybe she's going to die first, and he's never going to die. So this kasha, this teretz does not make sense. This teretz does not make sense. So let's see what it says over here. Let's see what Rashi says. Duvi made a face because he didn't like the teretz. I didn't understand it either. So if we look at Rashi, Rashi tells us shani hasam shoy amar shachas kadam misasi la'olam loy chayshin lamisa. You're really not chayshish for misa, and that's what you're going to eat the truma. The shiny hacha, by the get, it's worse. You know why? So I'm not worried that he died, but I'm worried that he's going to die in an hour. It's not a geshmak teretz at all. Behind the parkli, that's why the Gemara immediately comes back with a kasha. Come on, if you're not choshish for misa, mimai davigita. If you're not choshish for misa, you're not choshish that he's dead now. You're not choshish that he's dead in a minute. So she should still be alive. The la'olam humayis bereisha v'ner seres machayim. You're not choshish that he died first. Maybe she'll die first. Meaning he will never die in her lifetime, and then she'll remain alive. Okay, so that's the Gemara's kasha. You can't say because the minute before. If you assume he's going to be alive, and in a minute you let her eat truma still, there's no get. So how is it that you can? How is it that you can that we answer her b'truma?
What's the reason that everybody's mouth is out? The mouth is like a zucker.
The cheskes chaim.
The lady.
Yeah, that's right.
Without the chazukah, so we need to get the chazukah, but we know that eventually everybody's going to die.
So you're making a distinction between Shema Meis and Shema Yomus. Gewaltig. That's a gewaltig horror. The Gemara is going to get it there. Excellent. El Amar Abaye loy kasha. Maybe you can have a different shot. Let's say Harab Meir the loy chayish lemisa, Harab Yehuda the loy chayish lemisa. This is not your territory. This is a step before. So the Gemara says maybe you could make a distinction. Maybe Tamachalak is Tanoim if you're chayish lemisa. And in fact, the brisa that says you can continue to eat truma is going according to Reb Meir, who holds you're not worried that someone's going to die. But Rabbi Yehuda holds you are afraid of a fatality. Where do you see they argue about whether or not you're chayish for an unlikely fatality? From the brisa we learned a couple of days ago, Halakeyach yayin beinakusim, Oimer shnei lugan shani asad lahafish harein truma, asara meiser, rishon, tisha meiser sheni, and then umechel b'shoysim miyad. What was the case? Something about a barrel of wine that was tevel. It's right before Shabbos. He needs to be mafish trumas and meisers from it because he wants to be able to use this wine on Shabbos. He has no kalim, he has no time. What's he going to do? So he says, I am being mafish truma, but I'm leaving the truma in the barrel. I'm being mafish meiser. I'm leaving the meiser in the barrel. But where in the barrel is it? I can't take from it if there's truma mixed into here. The truma that which wine in this barrel is going to be truma? The wine that I'm going to take out after Shabbos, right? That was a shayla breira, but it works. But remember, we said Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosy, Shimon, Oishrin, and we said the reason why they ask her is because they're afraid Shema Yibak HaNoid. So they're afraid of a fatality. So you see, Rabbi Meir is not worried about fatalities, and Rabbi Yosy, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon is worried about fatalities. At the end of the day, if you ever wanted to buy insurance, buy it from Rabbi Meir, your rates will be lower. But that's what the Gemara is explaining. Yeah, are you worried about a fatality? That's exactly what it is. Are you worried about a fatality? That's what the Gemara wants today. Are you worried about these things happening or not? Like I said, if you want to buy insurance, buy from Rabbi Meir was an optimist, and Rabbi Yosy was a realist. Oh, you're saying good. You're saying good. That's a good order. That's exactly the next territory of the Gemara, which is really what Chaim was saying, right? You could have a cheskes Chaim, but you can't have a chazaka that you'll never die. So that's one shot. But the Rambam Amar says, no, let's say it goes according to everybody. Let's say everybody agrees that you worried that you are chashish for Misa. So Shema Meis loy chashina. Say everybody holds we're not afraid he died already because he has a cheskes chai. A cheskes chai tells us that he's alive now. Therefore, if there was no get involved and she's just married to a kohen and she doesn't know where he is because he's overseas, she can still continue to eat truma the cheskes chai. But Shema Yamus, nobody has a chazaka that he's not going to die in the future, and that so therefore the chazaka protects her. If there's no get, she has a cheskas being married to this man, and that stays. But a chazaka that she's not megureshes, that she doesn't have such a chazaka because we know he will die, and that's the chiluk. The brayso that says that she could continue to drink wine is without the get because she has a cheskas chai. The brayso that says she has to stop drinking wine right away is because the cheskes chai does not help her. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you don't assume someone's going to drop that in a minute just because he's old. I mean, if he has compounded problems, I don't know. So let's see Rashi. Rashi gets into a little bit. Shema meis l'chashinam do kaminon achazaka sheni l'chai. You left him alive. You assume he's still alive. Begabe kohen shahalach l'medina sayam even shaloi girsha. Since we're talking about a kohen who didn't give his wife a get. And in the Seresh Alan Kames, until we know he died, we assume that he's alive. That's what chazaka is. That we have a new problem. We surely are worried that he might die sometime in the future, even though it's in the immediate future. Him dying in a minute is not a stira to his cheskes chai, and therefore. She doesn't have her cheskes chai to protect her, and therefore we have to assume he might die soon, and then she's megureshes now, and therefore she may not drink from the wine. Very good. That's exactly where it comes from. You don't have a cheskes shelo yomas, so therefore you got to do tshuva. You can say, why should I do tshuva? I have a cheskes chai. You're right, but you don't have a cheskes shelo yomas. Gewaltig. My Rashiva, somehow it sticks in my head. Rebellion once read over Rabbeinu Yoina, and he says nobody will deny that they're not going to die. Everybody knows they died. Right? But people hold there's a kat mesim. Sure, people died. I'm just an exception to that rule. People, the Yosy is able to deceive them into thinking, yeah, sure, everybody dies. But I'm not from that group. I'm a different type. And that's what we can do. Various. Let's look at the noid. The case of the noid was, we're not saying that maybe it's broken now. We're worried it might break in the future. Reb Meir holds you don't even concern yourself with Shema Yamas. According to Reb Meir, your cheskes chai will protect you even from a Shema Yamas. Upligi, and you see Reb Meir holds it's still good, which means clearly Reb Meir would argue here in the case of the get. In the case of the get, where he gave her a get that's going to be chal 1 minute before he dies, weiter cheskes chai should allow her to continue to eat truma. Dr. Gemara, you're right. Amar vidu b'diskarta shiny noid the efsher the mosher le'lashem. First, we try to deflect that kasha. No, if someone dies, he's dead. But the noid, you can give it over to somebody to watch. What does that help? The guy who watches it can also break by him. There's no foolproof method. You're right. Everybody holds that the case of the truma where she didn't get divorced, she's Aisha's car and her husband went away to travel, she can for sure continue to truma because she has a cheskes chai. Shema Yamos, what about when she got the get from her husband? Does she have to stop eating truma right away? Tanoi, that'll be a machlokes tanoim. According to her marriage, she can continue to eat truma because the cheskes chai will even work against Shema Yamos, just like it works against the Shema Yivaka Hanoid. But according to the other tanoim, it would not be allowed. Someone had to bring a korban chatos, so he sent it with a shliach from Medina Sayyam. There's a technical problem. How could you send your chatos remotely? Do you not need smicha? And that you have to be there for yourself. You need to do this by yourself. It's speaking about the carbon of a woman. Women do not have a chiyuv to do smicha, as Rashi says. And she said, "The smicha Tanya daber el bnei Yisrael." v'samach b'nei Yisrael soimchin vein b'nei Yisrael soimchos. Gewaltig. So therefore, there's no issue with smicha here. So now it wasn't a man who sent the chatos; it was a woman who sent the chatos. No, the Bible has to do smicha. Yeah. Rav Papa Amar bechatos ha'oif. It's speaking about a chatos ha'oif, and the chatos ha'oif you don't do smicha on. It wouldn't survive. Utricha. Now the Gemara says utricha. We need 3 cases in our Mishnah to tell us the same halacha. That when you leave someone and he's alive, you can assume he's still alive. You can assume he's still alive and you can give the get. You can assume he's still alive and eat the truma, and you can assume he's still alive and be makri of the carbon. Why do we need the Mishnah to repeat the same halacha 3 times in a different case? The Ashmin get, if we only had a case of get, that's mishum delay efshar. What are we supposed to do? If we wouldn't be able to give her a get, then women will never get gittin. We have no choice. But maybe have a truma to efshar, but truma, let her not eat truma. Let's be makmer. Emaloi. Kamash V'lon, that no, even truma where she could technically eat chulin, we let her eat truma, and of course truma is less expensive. V'yashmi in truma, and if the Mishnah would only tell us the case of truma, zimnin delay efshar. Sometimes a woman is very poor and she simply cannot afford the extra percentage that the chulin costs. So we have to be makel with it, right? We're talking about a woman whose husband's not there anymore, right? V'yashmi in truma, the zimnin delay efshar. Avachatas ha'oid, maybe misveka loy leil chulin lazara. It's a shayla of chulin lazara. Right? If the guy died, if the mishalech of the carbon, if the sender of the carbon died, it's chulin lazara. Maybe don't put the shliach through that. You're making the shliach be mak of chulin lazara, and the Gemara tricha. That's why the Mishnah to say that even a carbon where there's a chash that the shliach is doing chulin lazara, which is a gefer lechavera, you still let him do it. Correct? I don't know who, but the Mesivta brings down and Gaval to the kasha. He asked, I don't understand. What about the kaihanim? How come the Kohen, we're worried about the shliach? Why isn't the Kohen worried that it's chulin lazara and I shouldn't be able to be metapel with this carbon? So I don't remember who he quoted from, but he quoted the Gavaltik Pshat. That Kohanim, even if they're the shlucha the done, but the shlucha the rachmana, the Kohen's mandate is to accept the carbon on behalf of Kadosh Baruch Hu, do his job. We're not representing so much the Bailam. We're doing our job. The Rebbe Shem says, when a Yid brings a carbon, I'm telling you to do A, B, and C. So the Kohen doesn't have to worry about that. If halacha l'maisa, they're allowed to bring the carbon, the kohen is allowed to be makar of it, because that's the mandate of the kohen. But the shliach would have a problem of potentially bringing chulin lazar. Tosha is a kasha with this, because chatas oif, we know l'chatchila, you bring a chatas oif on a suffix. L'chatchila, the halacha is that you could bring a chatas oif even though it's a suffix. So oif bezoy, what's the problem? So that's what Tosha asks over here. But l'chatas oif, bal a suffix. V'yashloimar, the adam atzmai, a person himself, bedin hu, shemevi al hasafik. If you have to bring a carbon, you have a chiv to bring it even though it's a safik. Because they live to atzmai. But hachal shliach, ein lavi chulin lazar misafik. The owner of the carbon, I understand, even if he has a safik, will bring it. But a shliach, they shouldn't be getting involved in that. So therefore, there's no terrorist to that kasha that chatas be brought misafik. That's for the Bailam himself, not for the shliach. The long Toshes talks about the Gemara. It makes it sound like smicha is mandatory. Tosha brings many rayos from certain places where you don't do smicha. If you can't do smicha, you don't do smicha. But Tosha says, in Chanami, where you could do smicha, you have to do smicha, but where smicha is impossible, in Chanami, you don't have to do smicha. But here, you shouldn't bring the carbon, because you can't do smicha. Okay, let's see the Gemara back. Shlosh Dvarim, Amar, Rabbi Lozer ben Prata, Lefnei Chachamim. There are 3 things that Rabbi Lozer ben Prata said in front of the Chachamim, and the Kaimu Estvarim, and they agreed with him. They were Mekayim what he said. Number 1, Al Ir Shakiva Karkum. They're under siege. If there's a city that's Rachman under siege, everybody in that city, their life is in great danger. Now, if Rachman Latlan, there's a woman somewhere and her husband's in that city, would we assume that he died or not? Or Balasvina Hamutrafas Payam. There's a ship that we know hit an iceberg, and they're in big trouble. We don't know if they're going to survive. Or Vahayoitza Lidon, or someone who is going to lead on Bedin in the Fashis, and the Gemara is going to delve into whether we're talking about a Jewish court or a secular court. But there's someone who's on death, he's on a death rap, meaning he's being tried for a capital offense. The halach is becheskas kayamin. They all have the status as someone who's alive. Aval ir shakiv shakarkum. But what if the siege is over and they've already conquered the city, or Swedish abdabayam, or the ship already went down, or or he was already condemned, and now they're leading him to the gallows. There, we're not sure if he's alive or dead. Any chumrah that would be there because he's alive, we have to be machmer, and any chumrah that would be on him because he's dead, we have to be machmer, because we don't know if he's alive or dead. So what's an example? Bas Yisrael a kohen. If the Bas Yisrael is married to a kohen, and she's only eating truma because she's married to a kohen, we have to be choshev that he's dead, and she may no longer eat truma. But what about a Bas Kohen Yisrael? If a Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael and her husband dies, she normally can go back to her father's household and continue to eat truma, or go back to eating truma, provided that she had no children with the Yisrael. But this Bas Kohen who married Yisrael, even though her husband disappeared, she may not go back to her father's household and eat truma, lo yisaychel b'truma, because in fact her husband might be alive. So we have to be machmer yisofik that he's alive and that he's dead. Gewaltig. Amar Yosy. Lo yishanu. This that we say that Yosy lidain, we don't assume he died because he could have been exonerated, is Ella bevezdin shol Yisrael. That's only if it's a bezdin shol Yisrael. Dr. Rashi, no, I made a mistake. Yosy leharig. I made a mistake. Rashi, lo yishanu the Yosy leharig. Don't say that it's a suffix if someone died or not, right? We say if it's Yosy leharig, it's a suffix if he died, and therefore you have to be machmer as if he died, and you have to be machmer as if he's alive. Don't say Yosy leharig. Nois nolav chomer chaim. Don't say that. Don't say that if he's going out, he was already condemned to death. He's on his way to the gallows. Don't say that we have to be choshev that he's alive. Ela bezdin shel Yisrael. Why? Because by bezdin shel Yisrael, even after someone was nifzak lemisa and he's on his way to get the misa executed, literally, right? He's ready going to sentence. He still has hope, as Rashi tells us that we learned in Sanhedrin. Sometimes even after they already passed in and he was condemned, another piece of information could come up that will exonerate him. They'll actually bring him back to Bezdin and retry his case. What they would do is they would go with a horse, and there would be a big flag there. They would have a big flag, and any time along the way they waved the flag because some type of schus came out, they would stop everything. So they had a way. They didn't have pagers, they didn't have communications those days, but they had a way to communicate in real time with the executioners, so that if something came up in Bezdin to exonerate him, they could stop it and they can communicate that immediately to save his life. So therefore, even though a Yid, the Bezdin shall show was Nigmar Lamisa, there's still a remote possibility, unlikely, but a remote possibility that he's still alive. But if he's been condemned to death in the Bezdin, in the secular court, even the Gomer Ladin Laktala, Miktal Katilit, he's a dead man. So therefore, the second half of our Mishnah that says Yosy Lidin is a suffix, that's only Yosy Leharig is a suffix, that's only in a Jewish court. In a Goyish court, it would not be a suffix. Amalei Abaye. Abaye said, what are you talking about? Bezdin shall oivdik achavim nami mekabla shoichta. You can easily pay off the judge, you can pay off the executioner, you can get your way out of it. So how could you assume that if someone's being led to death in a secular court, that he will for sure die? Maybe he'll bail himself out. Amar lei, that's impossible. He shakli mekame the lachtem persi shambak. You know when you pay off the dayan before the judge condemned you. Once it's condemned already, levasa the michtem persi shambak lo shakli. The persi shambak, it's a machlok, is Rashi and Tosha if it's a person or if it's a psak din. Rashi says lashon parsi who psak din. So once the verdict is given, before the verdict, there's a lot of bribery happening. After the verdict, there's no bribery. If you look at Tosha translates persi shambak as a person. Tosha says dayin gadol shlehem, the big honcho. The big honcho is a persi shambak. But whatever it is, we're talking post-condemnation, and there's no opportunity for him to save himself, therefore we can assume he's dead. Anytime two people come along and say, you see this Yankel that's walking free on the streets, we can say, Eidos, we know for a fact that in the Bezdin, in some other city that he escaped from, he's drawing zich around over here, they condemned him to death. He's Chayiv Misa, he's Chayiv Skili, he was Mechal Shabbos. I even know who the Edom were who said Eidos, that he was Mechal Shabbos, amazing, and therefore he's Chayiv Misa. That testimony is enough to kill him. The question is, The question is, how can you assume that you kill him? Maybe someone in between was a lamet chus. So Rashi, because if that's the case, just because I said Edus that he was condemned in Tam Bezdin, how do I know that between then and now, that same Bezdin didn't come up with a schus for him? So it must be you're not choshit for that. So Gemara, Dilma Barech Shiny. Yes, if he's running away, doesn't that show he's guilty? Chances are this guy they didn't found the schus on. We're talking about a guy who's compliant and he's walking with executioners. Such a person could be he's going to be found innocent. But a guy who's running away, there's no way this guy is innocent. That's why he ran away. Tashma. Shama mi bezdin shel Yisrael. Here. Shama mi bezdin shel Yisrael. We heard from a bezdin shel Yisrael. The bezdin declared, Ish ploini meis. This person died in our custody. Why would someone die in the custody of bezdin? Because we learned if someone is being over something that he gets malchus for, he's been over 11, but he's doing it again and again. How many times you can give him malchus? So what they do then is they lock him up and they feed him only barley, which expands in his stomach and it actually kills him. So they sort of cause his death without directly killing him. So when unfortunately this man dies, the bezdin will announce this fellow died, or ish pleninerak, or if they had to kill him because of a capital offense, so they'll say this person was killed. So the halach is yasius ishtay. We can trust 100% that this person is no longer alive and his wife would be allowed to remarry. But but if it's from the executioners, goyish executioners, if they say ish plani meis, ish plani nerag, you cannot trust them. Al yasius ishtay. You cannot be sure that he in fact is dead, and based on that, allow his wife to remarry. So, my mais umay nerag. When we have this testimony from the bezdin or from the goyish court that someone died or someone was killed, what exactly does it mean? Ilema meis mamish. If they're saying testimony that this man is actually dead, the nerag mamish, it actually occurred, well, then you have to compare the case by a Jewish court where the bezdin is believed to the goyish court where we're saying they're not believed. Why wouldn't you take their word, and based on the fact that they said he died already, that you could let his wife remarry? Hakaimelon, do we not know that the koil masich lefitumai, anytime a guy is just talking without a specific intent to accomplish something with what he's saying something in casual conversation, we can trust him. So you have a dayan who mentioned, oh, by the way, we killed this guy this week. Why can't you trust him? So Elamai, you do trust him. So then what is the case where the Bryce is making a distinction between the Jewish courts that are believed versus the Goyish courts that aren't? Elalav meis yotzalamos. When the bezdin said meis, it doesn't mean that he died already. It means he's on his way to being condemned. Nerag means yotzalahar. He's on his way to being condemned. So he was already nifsak lemisa, and now he's on his way to the executioner. Meaning, if they just say testimony that he's on his way to being killed, even though he wasn't killed yet, we can still assume that he's dead. Well, how is that possible? Didn't we just say that by a Jewish court there might be some schos that will come up? But the Katani b'Vezin Shal Yisrael Yasius Ishtay. So this proves that Rabbi Yosef is wrong, because Rabbi Yosef said by a Bezin Shal Yisrael, even after he was condemned to death, there's still a real chance that he's going to be alive. Dr. Murray, you're right. You're right. In fact, if they just said that he's on the way to being killed, Rabbi Yosef is right, and you wouldn't be able to let his wife get married because maybe someone found the source. So Lo'ila makes mamish, v'nereg mamish. Your problem was, why don't you believe the goyim? If the goyim say Mesiach levitumai that he was killed, with the garment that kavasei gabeyav tikachavim mamai loy, v'kaim alon the Mesiach levitumai himune hemnei. The Gemara, that's only under very limited circumstances. Hanimili b'milsa d'loshaychiba. You know who you will believe Mesiach levitumai if it's something that the person talking has no connection to, and he has no interest in whether it did happen or if it didn't happen, and you're just mentioning it you're just mentioning it in callous, common conversation. There you could trust him. But if they work for the Department of Corrections, then they're nagei b'davar. They want to show that we're an efficient organization. So they would say that a man was killed even though he wasn't killed yet, because they want to show that we're efficient. We condemned him and we killed him, and therefore you can't trust them even Mesiach levitumai. someone who's just a third party onlooker who has nothing to do with this Indian, yeah, him you could trust Masayach Chuvituan. Well, these aren't politics, they're bureaucrats. But in the Chanami, Ikad Amri, we have another way to present this exactly the opposite way, but with the same steps in the Gemara. So Amr Yosef, that we're not sure if this person that's Yochel Laharg is actually going to be killed, that's by a Goysha court. Because by a Goysha court, you actually can get out of it, even though you were condemned. Yisrael, even the Navak Ladin Lakatla Katlile. They're for sure going to get killed. What about the schus? Amalei Abaye, Bezin Yisrael Nami after the Chazal Eschusa. So the Gemara, Ki Chazal Eschusa, Mekamad Aluv Medina. When will they find a schus for a Jewish accused? That's before Bezdin convicts. Vaza Gemardina, Sulei Chazal Eschusa. Lemaisa, we learned it's possible to have until later. Toys is not shchiach. That's so unlikely, we're not worried about that. So therefore, if we see a man who was already condemned and is being led to his death, yes, there's a small chance that maybe he won't be killed, but we could be matter his wife because we can assume that didn't happen. Lema Messiah. So now it's exactly the opposite. So now the same places where in the last Gemara we asked the kasha from, now we're going to be bringing a riot. So it's the same sugya, but from the other perspective. Easy Gemara. Lema Messiah. Kamakam sheyamdu shnayim v'yomer me'idim anu es plani shenigmar dinoi v'vezdino shal plani uplani uplani. I'm sorry, v'vezdino shal plani kama uplani edav hareze yahar. So we said the halacha is that if they merely say testimony that he was convicted, we can assume that they were not malamet chus. So that's proof to what we're saying now is that once a yid is convicted in the best and for sure got killed, from there you don't have a raya. There, the fact that he ran away and escaped is a greater indication that he's guilty. So you don't have a raya to our sugya. Toshma, let's try another raya. Shamim bezin shal Yisrael shal Yarmim is plenty mace, is plenty nerag. Allah is yasiwas ishtoi. You could take it to the bank that if it's a bezin shal Yisrael, he's dead. That's going to be our raya, right? But mikom trisin shal oivdik achavim is plenty mace, is plenty nerag. Al yasiwas ishtoi. So what does a mace be? My mace, my nerag. Ilam mace mamish for nerag mamish. So why wouldn't you trust the guy? Because I say Gabi oivdik achavim my al yasiwas ishtoi. Hakayim alon kol masech levitume hemune hemnile. Ella lav mace means yoytzelamos. The nerag means yoytzelaharag, and nevertheless, because Tani bevezin shel Yisrael yasiwas ishtoi. So you see, once he was condemned to death in the bezin shel Yisrael, we can take it to the bank. We assume he's going to get killed, which is a support to what Rabbi Yosef has said. That mamish. No, it means we could only take it to the bank if he was already killed. So why don't you trust the guy to say the same thing? The same terms as before. Something that we're not connected to. That's when goyim are believed by Mesiach Levitumai. So again, we have two opinions. When a yid is condemned to death by a bezdin, can you take it to the bank, or do you have to be choshed that even after he was condemned to death, something can come up to exonerate him? And the same thing with a goy. If he was condemned to death and he's been taken to a goy, can we assume that he'll get killed, or is it possible that this guy will get out of it? So Rashi has a very interesting thing that he brings down over here. Nerag, we can assume that by a yid he'll get killed. Echad me arba misoy. So I'm on Rashi on Chav Ches Amud Beis, and then Rashi the Gabi Oivdik Achavim mace. By Oivdik Achavim, we know for sure he'll be dead. And Rashi brings down a funny story. Kemoy leKemunya Chalila the Ketia Bar Shalom from Mesechus Avodah Zarah. So we could assume that he's going to get killed. Let's look at Rashi. It says Ish Plani Nerag. You could if someone said he died, you could assume that he's dead, right? That the Gemara saying at some point that if the guy said he for sure he died, you can trust that he's dead. And Rashi brings down this case. I'm not sure why Rashi brings this case down, but it's a noteworthy case. Because in Avodah Zarah, the case was as follows: this fellow of Ketia Bar Shalom, I believe he was a guy, and he was one of the advisors of the king. And the king said, "What do you do if you have a cancerous growth? You cut it off. Get rid of the Jews." So Ketia told his king, I don't know if that's such a good idea to kill all the Jews, because the Jews are all over the world, and you can't. If you eliminate all the Jews, the world won't be able to survive. We need the Jews. He said, "Okay, but I don't need the Jews here. Get rid of them over here. Get rid of them in my kingdom." So Ketia said, you have a name to be a respectful ruler. You want to have the name to be a barbarian, to be a brutal murderer of your own citizens. It's not good for you politically. So the king says, you know what, you're right. But you got a big problem. Because we have a rule in our kingdom that if you one up the king, you die. And the way they would kill him is they would put him into a room that's full of earth. In other words, they would bury him alive. So this guy was being led to his death to be buried alive. And the guy turns to him and tells him, oh, you're such a loser. You're such a loser. You gave up your life to save the Jews, and you're still not even going to get into Gan Eden. You know why? Because you don't have a ticket. The ticket is in between your legs. You don't have a bris. So you're out of business, right? So it must be. So you know what he did? What he did was, either he took a knife right away and gave himself a bris, or he actually bit off his arla with his mouth so that he can get into Gan Eden. So I arrive from here that this guy didn't have pious. How do I know? Because if he had pious, he would have just went to the breast of it to pull him out of Gan Eden, to pull him out of Gehenna. He didn't have pious. He had no choice. He had to go the bris route. What? The breast wasn't around yet, right? So it could be even if he had pious, the breast wasn't around. So because of that, he had to rely on Avram Avinu to save him by his bris. Okay, let's see the Gemara back here. Miss Nissen. Maybe get the Eretz Yisrael. Someone brought a get in Eretz Yisrael. So he's a shliach, and he's in Eretz Yisrael, so he doesn't need to say b'fani nechta. He's in Eretz Yisrael, but he's sick, and he's not able to deliver the get. He's not able to fulfill and complete his shlichus. V'chala. So the halacha is harezem mishalchoi biyaracher. He can appoint another shliach in his place to continue the shlichus and to deliver the get. But if when the husband sent the get, the husband said, you know what? My wife has my watch that she's holding. Don't give her the get until you get me back that watch. If he says, you know what? Make her give you my watch back. Then you cannot pass it on to somebody else. Because I trust you with my Rolex, but I don't trust some other fellow who you're going to appoint in your stead. So we're going to have a discussion here. Does this have anything to do? Does it impact the get, or is this a side thing? Since he could still pass the get on, but the watch he has to bring himself. So the Gemara is going to discuss it. Amar Kana, Chala Tanan. It says in the Mishnah Chala, meaning the only way you're allowed to reassign your shlichus to the next shliach is if you're sick and you have no way to be able to fulfill your shlichus. But if you're not in the mood, you can't just willy-nilly pass on your shlichus to somebody else, only if you're anointed. Chalatnan. Correct, Gemara, why would I think otherwise? Pshita chalakatani. Does it not say that in the Mishnah? Dr. Gemara, you might have thought that in general you can always pass on these shlichusin, even if the shlich didn't become sick. So why does the Mishnah say chala? Normally a person would fulfill a shlichus. So the Mishnah is trying to give some context to explain why he would want to give it over. But technically, any person could give it over. Kamash v'lan. So Dr. Hechidami, this that we say a shliach can pass on a get to somebody else, or cannot pass on the get to somebody else. So let's say it says chala, so a shliach cannot pass on the get to somebody else unless he's sick. What is the case? If the husband just said, do me a favor, get this get to my wife. So then there's no hakpada that it has to be the shliach himself. I'm just telling him, figure out some way to get it to the guy, to get it to her. So then afagav deloy chaladami. So even if the shliach didn't become sick, the husband clearly just wants him to get it there. So if I get somebody else to get it there, should surely be enough. But if the husband told the shliach, at hoylech, I'd like you to deliver the get, well then, he's very, very clear. It's only you. He's only mamani you as a shliach. You can't pass this on. And therefore, afilu chalanami loy. Then even if it's an oinus, the shlichus is only to you, not to anybody else. And if you're going to hold of the sheet of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that we're going to introduce momentarily, no matter what, you would never be able to pass on the get. Afilu chalanami loy. No matter what, you could never give over a get. The Tanya we learned, hoylech get zela ishti, harezem mishalchoi biyaracher. If he said at hoylech get zela ishti, but if he said you have to do it, harezem lo yishalchet biyaracher. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says benkach ubenkach eina shliach o shliach. So the question here is, at the end of the day, what is our Mishnah talking about? If you said at, everybody agrees that you can't pass it on. And if you say that he didn't say at, then why did it need to be a chaylup? Zok to Gemara, we have two options. Ibai say mahaylech, v'hu dechala. Either it's speaking where he said hoylech, meaning he didn't say at hoylech, and even though in the brisa it says that you can give it to somebody else, the brisa meant you can give it to somebody else for a good reason if it was chola. So our brisa and the Mishnah will both agree only if he became sick. Our Mishnah speaks out the fair he became sick. The brisa didn't, but that's what the brisa means. But if you said at, then even if he's a chola, you can't pass it on because there's a hakbada. The Sema is at hoylech v'chola shayni. Or you could say that our Mishnah is even speaking where he said at hoylech. You asked him, I can't give it over. No, maybe even by at hoylech, if it's an oyniz, the husband doesn't mind if he passes it on to somebody else. The Sema, it's dependent on how Chazal interprets what a Baal means when he says at. Well, the das of the Baal will impact the chalosh and the shlichus, I assume, right? Because he is the one who's making the shlichus, so he sets it up based on his parameters. Yeah, that's right. But we're going to soon see some very funny things of shlichus. The Iboy Sema, because my question is, we're going to soon see the Gemara. If I'm shliach one, I give it to shliach two. Is shliach two working for me or is shliach two working for the Baal? So the Gemara is going to get into that. Iboy Sema, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, maybe it's going to go to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says you're never allowed to pass on the get, but maybe he's speaking without a good reason. Maybe even he agrees that the chala shiny, if someone is sick, avada you're allowed to pass on the get. Okay, Gavaltik. Tanan we learned. And maybe get Beit Yisrael b'chala. If someone brings a get in Beit Yisrael and he got sick, hareza mishalcha v'yaracher our mishnah. We're a minute for the Gemara. Amar l'shnaim. What if he said, it's already 6:50. We'll stop here. Baruch Hashem, we're a full amud ahead. We're doing okay. So we'll stop here, Beit Hashem, and we will mamshach tomorrow. My goal is to do another 3 amudim tomorrow, and then I'll be a full blood ahead.